Hello and welcome to another episode of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star's crime podcast. I'm Michael O'Toole, the paper's crime reporter, and joining me now is our chief reporter, Paul Healy. Hello, Paul.
Hello again, Mick.
So we're going to talk later on in this pod about a list that I've come up with, and we're going to have a good argument about it, about who the winners and losers are in the whole thing about the Regency Airport Hotel murder trial. I have an idea who I think some of the winners and some of the losers are, but others might be up for debate. But first, we want to talk about, you'll all probably know by this stage that Paul broke a fantastic story late last week about a senior investigator in the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission. And just kind of for any avoidance, because I did see some confusion about this, GSOC are not part of the Garda Síochána. They're an independent body, they're civilians, and they're not Gardaí. So we just want to clear that up because, look, to be fair, it is quite complicated. Crime reporters know, but I think Joe and Josephine Public in the street probably wouldn't have that level of knowledge. So when we talk about GSOC, we're talking about a body that investigates complaints made about serving Gardaí. And they're independent, but they're not Gardaí. There are some former law enforcement people, but they're mostly, in fact, I think they all are at this stage, people who were in foreign police forces. I think when GSOC started, some retired Gardaí did join, but I think they're mostly all gone. There might be one or two left, but it's mostly ex-law enforcement from overseas. So Paul's story is one of those few stories every year that really exploded, and it went from crime to politics and everywhere. So it's a mega story. So congrats, Paul, on this. And we just want to dig down into what we know and what happened. So, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mick. Yeah, I think we've a bit more freedom here to kind of explain the background to this, and just maybe people might be curious, or maybe they won't be, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, about maybe how you might get a story like this. Like I'm now in the Irish Daily Star 8 years this year, and these are the types of stories that come around once every couple of years, and you stop you in your tracks and you kind of go, okay, this is actually an important story. That's I've just been told something that is actually quite newsworthy, and is and how long do I now sit on it was the first scary thought. Well, first thought was it true? But look, it came from a source that I trusted, and has never been wrong. So it stopped me in my tracks. That's something I keep saying. It stopped me in my tracks when I was told it. So the information was that this senior investigator with GSOC had attended a party for Gerry Hutch with Gerry Hutch last Monday at the home he's residing in North Dublin. So even that kind of got me a little bit startled, because I thought it was rather extraordinary that Gerry Hutch would have a party with, okay, I imagine maybe his immediate family might have made sense, but I was surprised to learn that neighbours and people in the general vicinity were invited into the home on the Monday evening after Gerry Hutch sensationally walked free from the Special Criminal Court and was found not guilty of the murder of David Byrne. But then obviously the second extraordinary aspect of that is that this man, a senior investigator with the Garda Ombudsman Commission, attended this party, allegedly. But my information is that this officer confided in a colleague that he had attended this gathering, and he was then notified soon after that this would have to be investigated, that he would be facing suspension in relation to that. He then subsequently resigned from his job. I understand that he's been with GSOC for a good number of years. Prior to that, he was a police officer, but not a member of Garda Síochána. He was a police officer in another country, and I think has over 40 years worth of experience. So my understanding is that he actually was on the precipice of retirement anyway, and that he had told colleagues prior to this scandal, let's call it that, that he was planning on retiring anyway, and that he was going to go home to his home country in the coming weeks. So his retirement is something he was planning anyway, and when this allegation emerged that he attended this party, he decided to retire there and then. Fast forward now to Monday, the developments that we've now published in today's Star and Mirror is that this officer now they believe or they fear that he has already left the country or he's well on his way to leaving the country. And because he's retired, so there is an internal investigation that's been launched by GSOC, but he's under no obligation whatsoever to engage with that probe, and he does not have to agree to be questioned. If he was still in the job, he would have been suspended. He would have been subject to questioning and possible discipline were this allegation 100% true. But now that he is suspended, or sorry, now that he is retired, he doesn't have to engage with that probe at all. There has been widespread criticism and commentary over the weekend. This, as you said, Mick, this is one of those stories that's just blown up completely. The Minister for Justice has weighed in. The Garda, both Garda rep bodies, the GRA and AGSI, have weighed in on this, and there have been calls for potentially on Garda Síochána to investigate this, or for an external independent body to investigate this, because people have asked maybe a legitimate question as to, is it fair for GSOC to investigate itself in this matter? And there are serious questions to be asked. I'm going on a bit, but the other big issue here is that this officer was involved in a very high-profile investigation himself, which is the investigation into the death of Detective Superintendent Colin Fox. And Detective Superintendent Colin Fox died in Ballymun Garda Station in very tragic personal circumstances in 2019. And that is the subject of an investigation, his death and the events surrounding it. He was the lead investigator into the Regency Hotel murder itself, the murder of David Byrne. And people might recall that Patrick Hutch Jr. was on trial in 2019, accused of the murder of David Byrne. And as a result of Detective Superintendent Colin Fox's very tragic passing, that trial collapsed and a null prosequi was entered, and Patrick Hutch walked free. So it was a huge moment at the time. And obviously, if all of these allegations are true, it is being deemed to be a massive conflict of interest for this officer who was investigating the Regency Hotel murder to be then attending a party with the very man who was accused of that murder, Gerry Hutch, albeit he was acquitted. Still, for him to be potentially in his company and to be celebrating his release from prison and his not guilty verdict is deemed to be a potential massive conflict of interest.
And we still don't know. And for me, it's quite irrelevant, because for me, the story is that this man told at least one colleague he was at the party. Okay. I cannot get my head around why he did that. If he did go to the party, okay, mistakes happen. And you'd think that, with more than 40 years experience in law enforcement, his spider senses would be telling him that going to the party wasn't the smartest thing. Okay. So you have to separate that from him attending the party if it did happen. We still don't know it. I mean, that's just the way it is, because it's what he said, which is the important thing. And he told, now you used the word confided. Was it confiding or was it boasting?
That I don't know, but the fact that he stated it certainly implies that it was an acknowledgement or admission that he did attend. And I have separately corroborated that there was indeed a gathering. There was a party at Gerry Hutch's house. It did happen. Neighbours and friends and family were invited to the house. And we have learned that independently of this allegation by the officer that he attended said party. So that party did happen.
If you attend it, that's fine. That's one thing. But why tell people about it? I mean, I cannot get my head around that.
Yeah. Neither can I. Yeah. And I don't have the answer as to why that is. It seems extraordinary, doesn't it?
It reminds me of on a much smaller level, somebody I know was in work experience in a newspaper more than 20 years ago. And he looked at somebody's files, okay? He shouldn't have, but young journalists, we're all the same, right? And he did it, and that's grand. But then he told somebody that he did it. And that was so that was the end of him there. So, I mean, I'll never understand why that fella, this GSOC person, told somebody else, because there was a significant reaction almost immediately. It's fair to say that the person he told raised concerns immediately. So that person saw what the hell is this all about moment.
Indeed. And I mean, there are huge questions there. I mean, this officer had access to the entire Regency investigation. They had a file on that. would have met with and dealt with very high level people and sensitive issues. He met with the Byrne family, the parents of the victim, David Byrne, on numerous occasions, I'm told. So there's huge questions there, and every interaction that he's had now and everything that he's dealt with will have to be looked at as part of this internal probe. My understanding is that this is information coming from elsewhere, but and take it with the grain of salt that perhaps it should be taken. Because maybe this seems obvious, but I am told that as far as Gerry Hutch is concerned, he has claimed that he doesn't know this man, that he doesn't know him personally. And the claim is that neighbors were invited in and that this investigator was renting a room with a neighbor that lives on the very street that Gerry Hutch is residing on, and that he was invited as a result of that. And it was just a coincidence that he happened to be a GSOC investigator, and Gerry Hutch is claiming not to know him personally at all.
I would agree with that. I heard something similar over the weekend, that the Hutches were, or the people close to Gerry Hutch, shall we say, were sort of nonplussed by it. But that, again, it's not about that. It's about this investigator going into GSOC and saying, "Hey lads, I was at a party," and he should have known better.
He should have known better.
So that is the central issue of this story for me. Where do you think we're going to go with this?
I think it's possibly going to. I think it's probably going to go nowhere, because this officer is potentially leaving the country, and they can only take the probe to a certain point. If he's not there, it's not going to go anywhere in terms of an internal investigation. And now, unless the political calls get louder and someone says it's not good enough, and then there's an independent investigation of some kind, or a criminal investigation, if there is any evidence of any criminal wrongdoing, then An Garda Síochána get involved. But at the moment, they don't have any power to act on this at all. So I don't know. I don't see it really. I know it's blown up and people have got outraged, and rightfully so. But I think that might be, and maybe I'll be wrong on this, but it might go nowhere. You know.
Well, I think there's a couple of ramifications. You mentioned one, that he had access to the Regency Airport hotel attack, but I think it's fair to say if you're a senior investigator in GSOC, you would have access to a lot of personal data of Gardaí who are under investigation. And speaking to, people did, a lot of guards did contact me asking who he was, because that told me that they were wondering, has this the fellow who's been investigating me? So I think the concerns of Gardaí who are under the microscope from GSOC, and surely are very, very valid. And surely at the very least, remember all this stuff about the illegal argument, the fruit of the poison tree. Just say this man, led a criminal investigation in the other Gardaí and sent files to the DPP. I think they're at risk now.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to be at risk.
That's a good point.
Not on a technicality, but if this man was consorting with the Hutches, as he claimed, then that's really, really serious. And, it opens the door of doubt.
Yeah, sorry. When I say I feel it might go nowhere, I think it might go nowhere in terms of anything happening with him. But yeah, there are huge ramifications potentially for what he might have been investigating, and rightful concerns from the Gardaí on how GSOC operates. And perhaps, as a result of their internal investigation, they may look at how they operate and how they hire people and the types of persons that they work with. Yeah, there could be huge ramifications in regards to that, yeah.
But I think this is a hammer blow to GSOC. Its reputation has suffered monumentally because of this. And that fella, he may walk off into the sunset, but and I know what you're saying about the political aspect, but the reputational consequences for GSOC, I'm not saying they're fatal, but this is a serious hammer blow to their reputation. And without editorializing for a minute, GSOC investigate the guards. Surely there has to be a mechanism that GSOC can be investigated rather than internally, just even for public confidence in GSOC.
And there are calls for that already, an independent investigator.
But there have to be, I know maybe it's a circular thing, like that meme of Spider-Man, all the Spider-Men going after each other, but surely there has to be a way that some external agency, now for me it has to be the guards, because they're the investigators in this country, can investigate this incident, because there's the public interest public confidence in GSOC has to be protected.
But there has to be, the guards can't get involved unless they have some suspicion of criminal wrongdoing. Is it criminal to attend a party?
No, I wonder about that. I wonder, could the Justice Minister ask Gardaí to investigate? I wondered, is there a mechanism for that? I know that they're under the Garda Act, which set up GSOC. The commissioner, the minister of the day, can ask to see any Garda file. And I wonder, can he, in the public interest or whatever, can he ask? Because we know that, guards, the ministers do ask previously. I wonder, is that beyond the realms of possibility that the Minister Harris will say, right, listen, we need the guards to investigate this. This is very serious.
Well, that's, it's interesting. I am told that well before we broke this story on Friday, I think a couple of days beforehand, the guards were at a senior level, at management level, were aware of this. I believe that the Garda Commissioner was informed about it. So they knew about it for some time before I learned about it, and we broke the story. So, I mean, as I said, the Commissioner, I understand, was aware of this days prior. But I still think their hands are tied until someone makes a complaint, or someone, as you said, maybe the Minister orders them to commence an investigation.
Yeah, who knows? But I don't think it's gone. I think there's still legs in this story, politically, security-wise, and everything. But can we just... So it's a fantastic story, Paul.
Thank you, Mick.
I want to talk to you about one thing, and this pod is good because, I think we sometimes give context and we show what it's like to be involved in journalism and stuff. And you made a very valid point. Stories like this, we're jobbing hacks, and you sort of... It's almost like playing the lottery. You do your scratch card, and you do your scratch card every week, or you play your card every week, and sometimes you hit big, right? Because you get stories all the time, and they're good stories, but occasionally stories like this come along which go off the Richter scale.
Yeah,
I think that's fair, right?
As I said, once every couple of years, if ever, you get one.
Yeah, it is. Now it would be different, say, for Paul Cars, who get stories that dominate the agenda. Principally, I think because they're fed them and they're leaked them. That's another case, right? So, and that leads the agenda. Okay, but this is different. This is digging for stuff and developing your sources where you get stuff, right? God, the Paul Cars are going to kill me again. But anyway, c'est la vie. Anyway, so I want to know. Talk to me about what it was like for you in this particular instance between confirming it and it appearing. You broke it online because I think there was a fear that it was going to appear somewhere because it was starting to leak out, which always happens, right? So there were a couple of hours between you having it and it appearing on the Mirror website and it exploded.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Just to be clear, I wasn't sure that it had leaked out, but I did fear as the hours went by and as I continued to make inquiries that it was perhaps inevitable, given the gravity of it, that someone would whisper in someone else's ear, Jesus, did you hear? Because it is one of those. But yeah, it was. I had it from early on Friday, and as I said, the source that gave it to me, I trust, and has always been 100% correct. I'm very fortunate that person, and thank you to them for speaking to me. I'm very fortunate that they entrusted that.
This is a time to use pronouns, isn't it? That's what I always say this.
Yeah, I gotta be careful. We have to protect our sources, and it's we are always. I am very grateful for anyone that ever confides in me and trusts in me to impart information like that. But even this was so shocking that they felt it needed to get out there, I'm sure. But then I sat on it for some time. I knew that they were probably 100% correct, but they would obviously expect me to corroborate it and to check, given the gravity of it, which I did continue to make inquiries. And I eventually made a formal query with the GSOC press office. And I knew by the reaction that I got from the phone call, I didn't get laughed at, for example. I knew that I was onto something. I would say that they expected the phone call, and they spent the entire day coming back to me before they came back with a no comment. We don't comment on internal HR matters, is the way that they phrased it. I kind of felt from that point on our time was with the story was limited. It's 5 o'clock in the evening at this stage, and I thought, right, I had it since about 10 a.m. So between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m., it had stayed quiet. No one knew about it, and as far as I was aware, no one else had rang the GSOC press office about it. So but I still felt the second I've done that, it's only a matter of time. So we sat on it, and I was getting maybe a little too overexcited and panicky. You know yourself, Mick. I was ringing you and going, "What would you do? What would you do?" And you were like, "Fucking run it online."
And I'm going to tell you why. One of the reasons I did fear, I told you this, I did fear that it was going to emerge because,
Yeah,
look, I'm not
it's too
casting
big. It
aspersions
was too
on
big to.
no, I'm not casting aspersions on anybody you spoke to, but I'm just saying there's a chain of command
Yeah,
in any organization,
yeah,
and it's not going to be siloed, shall we say? But you know what? I didn't tell you this. One of the reasons why I found if I get a stonker of a story on a Saturday, it doesn't get the purchase that it should.
yeah.
I don't know why, right? And I wanted this to get all the purchase. So I did advise you, but it was your decision. But look, I always just
No,
think,
and you
do
were
you ever
right. Yeah,
notice,
yeah.
on a Saturday, do you know when you've got stonkers on a Saturday and you're going, right, everybody's going to lift this? And it's not mentioned.
Yeah, I was worried about that too. Yeah.
So I had to,
I
it was
just
a story of the year for
you
me.
hate and literally the public do not care about this, but journalists get a little bit protective of their stories, and I was obviously look privately quite proud and happy that I had been told that information, that I had it first, and felt it was a good exclusive. But there is kind of a feeling that when you put something up online, everybody kind of just copies it then, and then everybody has the story, and it kind of looks like
But
it
they did.
dilutes it. But no one really cares about that. The general public don't care about that. Just us and our egos care about
Well.
that.
No,
Yeah,
there's professional courtesy, and to be fair, when the Irish Times lift my stories or aggregate them, or whatever, they do. Lally and Gallagher, to be fair to them, they do, which
credit.
as mentioned in the Daily
Yes.
Star, they do. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I was not talking about them, but I was disappointed that some outlets didn't credit us or you. I thought that was poor form, but let them at it. It's
I'm
you're right.
I'm
This
not.
is inside baseball.
Yeah, I'm not that precious about it, and I was grateful when RTE took our story that they did credit us. They did credit the Irish Mirror with breaking the story, and thank you to Paul Reynolds for doing that. Having said that, once it's out in the ether, that's it. It's everybody's story, and that's fine. I have to accept that. Especially with the gravity of it. Anyway, that's enough about me being precious and my ego.
But no. Let's just go back to this, Paul, because I said we wanted to speak about this. Just you. Very few, as I said, very few journalists get the experience in this. What were your feelings? Not about getting the story when you had it. Let me give you an example. Right, many years ago, I got a big story, and it was the real IRA admitting responsibility for the Uma bomb. Okay, now we got that say about 10 o'clock. They rang me in my office and blah blah blah, and they're right. So we had that from 10 o'clock. Now this was in the old days. It was 1998, and it blew up at 5 o'clock. Right now. And I'm not joking about this. The switchboard lit up. It was one of those cliche things. So, and I was waiting for that to happen. I knew it was going to be a big story. And there've been maybe 7 or 8 biggies like that since. But just that, like, I had butterflies in my stomach.
Yeah, it was a huge buzz. Yeah.
Did you talk to me about what you felt?
Yeah, it was a huge buzz, and I felt okay. This is actually an important story, and then it's you know yourself. I think I've heard you say it. Like it's a great thing. It's a great thing to be told things. It's an honor to be among the first to know something. So yeah, but I was kind of I was pacing the floor all day, really kind of wondering when do we break it, and you don't want somebody else to have it, and then if someone else breaks it and you had it all day. So yeah, the heebie-jeebies, the butterfly feeling, complete excitement. But I was glad that we put it out when we did. So and it just blew up. Like,
Did you feel awkward?
Awkward.
At the same, by that I mean, look, we're both egomaniacs, and there's no problem there. We've got a great welcome for ourselves, but this is a different level, right? Did you not? Because I know that I certainly do. When you're at the center of it, do you not feel slightly awkward?
Oh no, I love when all the attention's on me, Mick. I really do. Like, I'm a total narcissist. No, no, I was completely nervous about it, and it was a weird feeling. But I was glad, like because there are lots of days when you do this job and it's kind of box ticking, and we've written our fair share of crap. Like, I mean, I'll be honest. But I stand over everything I write. But I mean, it's not always going to be Pulitzer Prize winning or anywhere near. But you get the odd story that you're really proud of, and I was proud of this particular story, and I thought it was an important story, and it had all the elements that you want in a story. It has a bit of, obviously, Gerry Hutch, the biggest story of the week, and has a bit of gangland, has a bit of scandal, has a bit of civil servant stuff that people don't like. It has had kind of everything, but overall, my overall sense, it sounds a bit cliche, but I just felt it was, and that's why the source confided in me. They obviously felt it was important and people needed to know it, and so I did get that overwhelming feeling of, why am I holding on to this? People need to know this, and they need to know it now. Well, that's what news is all about. That's what breaking news is all about. So
it's the last thing I'll say on this. I always I regret downplaying big stories, because you sort of have this sort of modesty and go, no, we got lucky and whatever. So fucking just embrace it, because it is something to be proud of. And it's not just sort of, you know what I mean? Your sort of natural modesty, even though we are egomaniacs, it does come in. We go, I got lucky in that, or it fell into my lap. I regret doing that, I have to say.
I'm proud of it, and I'm very happy with it. Yeah, but I will be a little bit modest about it in that I am happy to have been told it, and honored to have been told it. And so I think every journalist feels that way when you get an important piece of information. Yeah, it's like, that's what you're in the job for.
Exactly. Right. Is there anything else you want to say about it? Anything else you need to say about the story or the incident?
No, unless it evolves further, which it may well do during the week. We will leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on now. There's a couple of things we want to talk about, the winners and the losers, but we did have questions and answers, and we've done one episode, and our producer Ciaran Bradley is lining up more, but somebody missed the deadline, which is outrageous, but I have it here. I'll just read it out. If Jonathan Doyle, it was a DM, so I can't say who it was. If Jonathan Doyle had not turned state witness, was he accused of murder as opposed to conspiracy? So he was accused of murder. If you remember, people will remember, he was originally charged with murder, and then he pleaded guilty to facilitating a charge. This person says, if so, what was the evidence that he was a hitman as against an accomplice? Well, there was no evidence that he was a hitman. The evidence was that he booked the room. And that would have been it. But I wonder, I was talking with this person. I said, look, it's slightly different from, say, being they weren't the getaway drivers, but they drove away the team that used the getaway car and burned it out. So there was a sort of like second cousins, I explained to him. Do you think if he had been charged with murder, if things hadn't gone the way they went with him, becoming a state witness, do you think there would have been enough to convict him of murder?
I haven't thought about that.
It's a very good question. Thank you, questioner.
Well, the tapes, they were heavily scrutinised in this trial by Miss Justice Tara Burns, and in relation to Gerry Hutch, who the case was against, there were arguments for potential guilt in relation to involvement overall, but there were also arguments against. That she did go out of her way to say that Jonathan Doyle says a lot of incriminating, terrible, horrible things in the tape. Talks about having people whacked. Talks about blowing up Trevor Byrne. Talks about making circuits and bombs. I think if that evidence had been presented in his trial, which it would have been, he would have not come out of it very well. It would have shown his character and the type of person that he was. Couple that then with the fact that he so openly and freely booked that room, and then you're supposed to believe, I didn't know who the room was for, given his involvement all the way along with Patsy Hutch and with the feud, and his knowledge of the Regency, and he's the one doing 99.9% of the talking on the tape. Yeah, I think the case against him would have been very strong. Having said that, the case against him wouldn't have been that he was the shooter.
No.
It would have been, what's that term you used?
Common design.
It would have been common design. But I think it probably would have been, given the amount of criminality he talks about on those tapes, coupled with his involvement all the way along. I think it would have been a pretty strong case against him.
I have to agree. I think, and I said this to this person, look, it's not, there was no allegation that he was the hitman, but taking part in the conspiracy or the plot. I think, and I also wonder, look, obviously he pleaded guilty, right? I wonder, would there have been other evidence adduced against him if he fought it, if he fought the murder charge? We don't know, right?
We don't.
Because, he is this, just remind me of this, because this, I was arguing with somebody last night about it. When did the guards first become aware of Jonathan Doyle? When did they first start surveilling him, if shall we use that term?
January 2016, before the Regency.
Exactly. So that's an indicator for me that they were looking at him. Why were they looking at him? They were looking at him because of intelligence and possible evidence. So I wonder what else they had in their armory against him that didn't need to be brought in because he pleaded guilty. Look, obviously, Paul, someone pleads guilty, there's a sort of sentencing hearing, but the evidence really, the narrative, there's a narrative read out by the prosecuting or senior investigating guard who reads it out, answers questions that the senior counsel will put to him to the judge. So background and stuff. But the hard evidence really isn't put in. And I wonder what else they had. I feel that if he hadn't done what he did, I think it would have been a very bad time for him murder-wise. I think he would have been in serious bother.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah.
So, yes, so I think Doyle would have been in trouble. And I think that may have made him do what he did. Did you see, look, this is about our pod, but did you see in I sent you and Ciaran a piece about, in one of the Sunday papers, talking about did Jonathan Doyle effectively, basically saying what I said about the Gardaí had concerns about Doyle as a witness. Mm-hmm. Did you read it?
I did, yeah. I did.
I thought it was from the great Debbie McCann, one of Ireland's most underrated crime reporters. Yeah. Really is. Her and Maeve Sheehan, for me, they never get the credit they deserve. But I thought it encapsulated everything I've been thinking. And my sources were telling me that from the start they were saying the same thing. So, look, I know there's this the conspiracy about Gerry and he coming together. That's nonsense. But I do think there are serious questions about Doyle and his rationale for doing what. That man saved himself and he was desperate, particularly what we said in the last couple of minutes about the murder charge. So I think the Gardaí who we speak to have legitimate fears that Doyle took the piss, basically.
Yeah, and they initially early on, and this was accepted by the judges, they did not want to take Jonathan Doyle and what he had to say seriously. They treated him with huge skepticism from early on. There are legitimate questions about what changed and when. I suppose you've got somebody saying, I have evidence that's going to help you put Gerry Hutch away. And I mean, you really can't blame them in that regard. We're going to have to talk to him. But the second they did talk to him, did they damage their case? Because they already had him charged with murder. They were already going to trial. But the second they decided to accept his evidence, the entire case changed. And the case now had to be Gerry Hutch is one of the two shooters. I think it's fair. We asked this question on the previous pod, did that damage the case? I still think the evidence on the tapes didn't find Gerry Hutch guilty of murder. And maybe overall it still wouldn't have been a particularly strong case. But Jonathan Doyle was a hugely, hugely damaging force for the case overall. You couldn't believe a single word he said, and everything he said only cast everything into further doubt. Because you were left wondering, well, what the hell can we believe? So
it definitely weakened the case for me, I have to say. Yeah. But look, as we said, we weren't privy to the roundtables and the decision by the DPP and her thought process.
Well, I that's why I'm thinking that this is off the cuff thinking this, but can you blame them that in the end they had to talk to this guy? Because, I mean, he told them, I have information that's, crucial to your case. And he was telling them that this fella confessed. I'm sure they still treated that with huge skepticism. We don't even know, did they try to corroborate his claims beyond the phone evidence? Did they look for CCTV in the park? It was probably too late. Was it 7 years later? Just did they even bother?
I don't know, but it is. I mean, most CCTV, it would be months and sometimes weeks that it's kept for. And say even traffic cameras, because that's we were up at it. It's on the M1. But my understanding is those traffic cameras, they don't really record. It's more live monitoring. But look, obviously, and even then, 2006, like a lot of people have CCTV. They're much more affordable now. A lot of people have Ring doorbells and on CCTV video doorbells and stuff. So you'd wonder, and we were at the scene. It's quite a wide area. There are houses. There are plenty of houses. So maybe I don't know, but I'd say it's very unlikely. And even mobile phone data, because they and without going down the Dwyer route, they could have gone back 2 years. So that, if he came forward in 2021, and even then they probably couldn't, that would only be 2019. So, the media and all those companies don't keep them for that length of time. So, look, they obviously, as that senior counsel said to me, if some fella comes along and said, Gerry Hutch told me X, how can they ignore it? You're right, but it clearly weakened the case. It muddied the waters, and it made them go far too specific.
Yeah, it massively muddied the waters, yeah. Yeah, and it cast doubt over the entire case. Yeah, was it a conspiracy though? Was that all by grand design? I definitely think he was out to protect himself, but I think that's where that ends. That conspiracy ends.
100%. I don't get for a second that he and Gerry Hutch in Wheatfield said, "Listen, Doyle, you go in there, you say this, and this, no problem, boss." Nonsense. But I do think that it was said he was not being truthful. It was said he is a liar, and he was out to protect himself. And I think, just talking about this here, I think there was much. I don't think it's unfair to say there was probably more evidence to sustain a murder conviction against him than Gerry Hutch. Even when he was talking about bombs and everything, the Miss Justice Tara Burns could have picked that all together. Before we go on to this, just one final question. There was a story in the papers over the weekend about they seek him here, they seek him there, that Daniel Kinnan is supposed to be in Iran. Now, I'm going to tell you, before you go, my view on this is, as it's been the whole time, I heard that in January, I think I heard that he'd gone. Then we heard that he'd stayed. I heard that he was going between Jordan, Qatar, the UAE, everywhere, right? I just think people don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm not casting any doubt on your sources. Certainly, I'm sure I know that you have good sources. Not trying to sound condescending. I mean, people have told me he hasn't gone anywhere. But that doesn't.
Sure, but I've been told the same.
You don't know. Unless we're actually physically seeing him there, we don't know. You're right.
That's it. Okay, shall we talk about winners and losers?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think in answering the questions there about Jonathan Doyle, I think you should probably start with him. What do you think? Because I think we've almost nearly answered that question already as to whether he's a winner or a loser.
Yes. So the format I've decided just now.
Oh, go on. Yes.
No. We'll talk about Doyle, all right? No. It's fine because it only came to me. I'm going to give you a name, and then we can decide if they're winners or losers. Okay.
Go for it.
Right, Jonathan Doyle. I'll go. I think he's a winner.
Yeah, I think he's a winner. Yeah.
That man was facing at least 20 years behind bars. And I do think he had a greater chance of being convicted of murder. So he did what he had to do. Now, I think you and I'd both be happy that he hasn't been admitted at this stage into the witness security program. People were telling me, now I might be wrong, they might be wrong, that there's a possibility that he won't be accepted into it, which would be calamitous for him. And I did speak to one person who said, no, he doesn't. But others said, oh, look, there's a duty of care, and just say he gets whacked walking down the road or whatever. That's fine, right? But I think overall, he's in a better position now than he was in 2020 when he was charged.
Than when he was charged. Yeah, I did say this in the previous pod. He still has a lot of problems in his future. I mean, he's going to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. His life is under threat from God knows who. I mean, you've got Kinahans for starters, and there would be people on the Hutch side who certainly wouldn't be his friend anytime soon. And then even in relation to things that he said in relation to Republicans, people in the world of dissidents are not going to be his friends either. So he's a loser in that regard. But in terms of bettering his situation, he's massively won in that regard. And if he is admitted to the witness protection program, That's a huge win. He'll go abroad and he can, and Miss Justice Tara Byrne said this, she had no doubt that he would be able to start a new life for himself. And he said that he would do that, and he'd done it before, and he will rebuild his life. If he gets to go abroad and live under a different name, that's a massive, massive win for him, yeah, because he was facing the prospect of the rest of his life behind bars. If he is rejected in that program, then he's in real doo-doo. But I think what you said, you made that point there that a source of yours said, there's a duty of care, and what if he gets whacked? Can you imagine the scandal that would emerge if he was not granted protection and then he was murdered? I think people would just turn and unfairly so on the guards and say, "You knew this would happen." So there's a lot at play there. I think that's why he probably will get the witness protection.
I thought that was a persuasive argument, the source I was talking to, and it has made me change my view on that. I think it is more likely now that, yeah, look, because of that, but not, I mean, but the other person did say, and I did see in Debbie's piece, they said the same thing, reputationally, are we okay, or is the state or the Garda Síochána, they're uncomfortable with sending a waterboarder abroad. So that, I think that was weighing on what my source was telling me about why they think they won't get it, because that's a very big thing. And that's really heavy criminality. And, he is a liar and that sort of stuff. So will he damage any international relations that the guards have? So for me, it's not automatic, but I'm veering towards now, because of the duty of care, that he probably will, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't happen.
But in spite of him being in a better position, he is a bit of an idiot. I mean, like, he got a 4-year sentence. I mean, he'll be out in 2.5, 3 max. He's done very well for himself, yet he's appealing that sentence. It just shows you it's a bit about his character and what he's like, and that it's always a kind of a sense of entitlement and trying to do better, even when you've already done incredibly well for yourself. I'm told from the second he went into prison, he was looking for ways to get out of it. That is kind of the way he seems to have lived his entire life, trying to get out of a bad situation. That's the way that he operates. It's extraordinary that he's appealing his sentence, quite frankly. But yeah, overall, when you look at it, we're saying winner on that one, yeah.
Okay, so I have a list of winners here. Number 1, Gerry Hutch.
Yeah, obviously Gerry Hutch is a huge winner. I think anyone, as I said, who looked at the case would have said that a not guilty verdict was the right conclusion. And I'm sure that when he was sitting there and he was listening to the judgment, he felt confident that he was going to be acquitted. Having said that, there was still a sense of shock when it actually happened. You have to look at it from this point of view, that the level of effort that went into getting him back here. I mean, he had started a new life abroad. I don't think he intended to return. His life was under threat. And he had even gone so far as to try and alter his appearance a little bit because of all of that. And then he was dragged back here, flown back here in the late evening on a military aircraft. And I'd say at that point in his life, he probably felt, they've gone to this level of effort to get me, I won't see freedom ever again. And I'd say he probably spent that year of his life beginning to build his case, and he got to read the book of evidence when he landed. I mean, and when he went through that, he would have known the case against him, and maybe he felt a bit more confident then, I don't know. But there was probably a sense, because you could see the way he fought it at every level to try not to get into the special criminal court. There was probably a sense, if that's where it ends up, I'm going to be convicted, because as we talked about before, statistically, that's just the case. And there is a feeling among many, and certainly within people in the criminal underworld, that if you're going to the special criminal court, it's a kangaroo court and you're fucked. Well, that has been disproven. The judges did look at the facts and they found him not guilty. So I think for a long period of time, he probably thought he was goosed. He probably thought he was in real trouble. He probably thought that they would never let him walk out the doors and see freedom again. And it's evident by his behavior since he's been released, that he seems to just be sort of enjoying life and has gone back to the North Dublin area where he resided prior to the Kinahan Hutch feud occurring. And he's cut a very relaxed figure. I think he's just enjoying that freedom and that win that he has maybe unexpectedly received when you look at it as a whole. And then in terms of the Kinahan Hutch feud, he has survived all this time in spite of being a massive target. That's not to say he's out of the woods. I mean, he certainly still is under serious, serious threat, as are members of his family. So in that regard, I don't want to say he's a loser, but in that regard, he's got challenges ahead of him. But yeah, like overall, I mean, he can probably sail off into the sunset now if he's smart, which we know that he is. So yeah, huge winner.
And another reason why I think he's a winner, and I mentioned this in the last pod, and there was some media coverage about this over the weekend. The other investigation into him, we know that he was arrested on suspicion of directing a crime gang. That was just before he went on trial. That was in late September 2022. Now, I've said this. I think this victory significantly diminishes the chances of the DPP proffering a charge in that. I'm not going to say it's impossible. We don't know the evidence. We don't know what technical evidence or whatever they have. But I just think, it's all about the DPP would sometimes not charge for the public interest, which is a nebulous sort of phrase. But really, I'm taking from this, the bar has gone up several notches for that case. And I think they'd have to be sure. So I think it's more likely than not that he won't be charged over that. So that's a double win for him.
I don't want to, and I know you're not either, Mick, but I just want to raise this point in case anyone accuses of it. I don't want to minimize the loss, the personal loss that obviously Gerry Hutch has had over the years. He did lose his brother 3 days after the Regency. He was murdered. He did lose his nephew Gary. He lost his nephew Derek, and he lost his nephew Gareth. He lost 2 associates and friends in this feud. 18 people were murdered in total. He spent the last 7 years looking over his shoulder. He avoided being murdered himself in Lanzarote, and he will continue to be under threat. So in that regard, he has a difficult life, and those around him, those that continue to associate with him, will also be looking over their shoulders. And so that's we're not minimizing that level, but in terms of the case against him and potential future cases against him, yeah, he's a huge victory.
Definitely. No, that's very important context, but he has come out of this much better than anybody would have expected, I thought. Okay, here's another name for you. I think this person is a winner. Patrick Hutch Jr.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the case against Patrick Hutch Jr. was very strong in regards to the evidence that he was alleged to have been the gunman in drag wearing the blonde hair. Because the case that was against him, there were 2 senior investigators who identified him as being Patrick Hutch. And if that evidence had been accepted by the judges at the time, he was going down without question. And then in the Gerry Hutch trial, again, all of that evidence came up, and the search at the home in Champions Avenue and the ACT cards, etc. And just given that he was the brother of Gerry Hutch, who was murdered, and the context to all of it, I think he was facing a very serious case, and potentially, I think it's fair for me to say this, Mick, tell me if not, but I think out of all of the persons that have been charged in relation to this, he was facing the most cohesive case. He was facing the most straightforward case. And had the very tragic death of Colin Fox not occurred, the case would have continued. It would. We don't know what would have happened. Perhaps he would have been acquitted. Perhaps the evidence wouldn't have been accepted. It's important to state that. But I think in terms of, because throughout the Gerry Hutch trial, you were wondering what is the evidence against him, and there's lots of tangential, circumstantial sort of stuff, and there's circumstantial in relation to Patrick Hutch Jr. as well. But I still think overall it was a very cohesive, more straightforward case against him, and he was in serious trouble. But once that case collapsed, I think there was an acceptance at the time that it was highly unlikely that he would ever face any court again in relation to this. I still think that's the case. I think that his uncle now being acquitted also strengthens that argument that they're not going to put Patrick Hutch Jr. in a courtroom anytime soon unless they have other evidence, unless it's a different charge. But I would be stunned really, if he's among the first to be looked at in relation to future charges. So I think he's a huge winner in this, yes.
Yeah, so and my point was that, look, obviously it was a nolle prosequi,
Yes.
which means it's shelved rather than the case was that had been acquitted.
Yes.
It was effectively acquitted, but it was still technically it could be re-entered. And I just think the outcome of this trial and everything about Doyle has made that much less likely. It was unlikely. It's much less likely. So for me, he's a winner from this. Okay, here's another one. Here's another doozy for you. Brendan Graham.
Well, it goes without saying. I think it's a massive victory for Brendan Graham. Yes. How many people walk free, really, when they're accused of murder? We should probably get that statistic. But I just think, for his persona and for his, bona fides, yes, huge victory for him. And like he has done many high-profile cases before this, but I think everyone now knows his name. Yes, so if you do find yourself needing legal representation, I'd say there's a lot of people looking for Mr. Graham now.
Yeah, that was my point. I can imagine people in doo-doo all across the country about to be charged and they're worth this. So the way it works, the solicitor has to engage a barrister, obviously, and you can just imagine all these fellas going, "Get me, Brendan Graham." So I don't think you'll have any problems with work for a while. Here's another one for you: the Special Criminal Court.
Yeah, I won't go on with this because I kind of covered this already. But yes, as I pointed out before, lots of people think it's kangaroo court and you're going for the special. That's it. You're fucked. You're going to be convicted no matter what. Well, the judges looked at the evidence. There was no evidence to convict him of the charge of murder, so he walked free. They said they lived in the real world, that they're not, in some plane higher above everybody else. They're real people. They look at the facts. And Justice Harburn's judgment was very simple, plain language for anyone to understand, that when you look at the bare facts, there was no case there. This was a huge win for the Special Criminal Court. And I think it would have damaged the reputation of the court had he been convicted of murder. People would have always criticised it and pointed out this case. How could you have convicted Gerry Hutch of murder based off that evidence? Well, they didn't. So I think a huge win for the Special Criminal Court and for the legitimacy of that court. Yes.
Okay, so I think it's fair to say, and we'll have no argument about this, in relation to losers, there is no question for me that the Garda Force and the state are losers in this case.
I think, and you're not saying this, I know, but I want to make the point that this is no criticism of the guards overall who investigated this case, which was probably the biggest in the history of the state. The level of manpower and hours and months and years that went into it. Clearly, it was thoroughly investigated. But it was all collated and put together, and it was presented to the DPP. That is where the problems began. We still don't know whether they wanted to charge Gerry Hutch with other offences, and it was the DPP that ultimately made the decision, no, just a murder charge. I think there are huge questions now over how that was handled, and that might have to be investigated or looked into as to how was that decision made and why was that decision made. So yeah, but I'd say there were a lot of guards coming out of the courtroom there last Monday, very naturally, obviously upset, because I don't want to speak for any one particular investigator, but I think there is an overall sense of disappointment in the way that the case was handled. Is that fair to say?
If that's their view. What I will say in terms of losers, I have no doubt this was a setback for the guards and a setback for the state, at the very least. Now we can look, Paul. I mean, we've said this all the time. We are not in the inner circle. We do not see the legal advice, and we'll have to respect that they make their decisions and the guards have their strategies. What I'm saying is this is undoubtedly a setback for the state and for the Garda investigation. And I also think, just on a tangential point, I consider the National Surveillance Unit are losers in this, and I'll tell you why. They are, when I started in this game, the National Surveillance Unit, the guards didn't even acknowledge that they existed. Okay, when we say hush hush, we mean hush hush, right? Very, very secretive group. So, and they work on intelligence, and an awful lot of what they do is in the shadows by its very nature and by their very necessity. A lot of their, it must have been very uncomfortable for it to be laid bare in open sunlight, their tradecraft, things they did. So everything. So, what guards call gougers, they do observe things, they do watch things. So, I think it's been a bad experience for them. It's perhaps been a bruising experience for them to have all the sunlight shone on what they do.
Yes, and it was determined that the surveillance that went on in the north was illegal. So I think there will be legitimate questions about how they conduct that type of surveillance in the future as well. Okay, it was entered into evidence, but and it was determined that they acted in good faith. However, they did act illegally. So, it probably wasn't comfortable for that to emerge.
Okay, I put it to you. Let's pretend we're in a guard interview room. I put it to you that Patsy Hutch is a loser from this.
Well, up until this point, he was a winner because the guards had all of this evidence in relation to Patsy Hutch, and yet he had not been charged with any criminal offence. And he was walking the streets of Dublin. In fact, last week, still walking the streets of Dublin without a care in the world. He has 24-hour surveillance on his home. Now, that's because of a legitimate threat against his life. But he's constantly watched and monitored at taxpayers' expense. So up until this case, really, I think he was fine. I think, though, now legitimate questions have been asked about his involvement in the Regency and the movement of the firearms, and you would have to conclude that he would be under investigation at this point, and that he has serious questions to answer. So yes,
that's like, I mean, what the judge said. What did the judge say at the top line about Patsy Hutch? That he was effectively, there are suspicions he was effectively in control of it.
That he was in control of the firearms, and that he possibly organised the entire Regency thing in the first place. Yeah.
So when an esteemed judge says that about you, and it's down in black and white, anyone would consider that a bad day.
Oh yeah, massively so. But I still think that question that we've raised about his son and the possibility of him facing future is a legitimate one to ask in relation to him. Are they only going to try Patsy Hutch on the basis of the evidence that we've heard in the case of Gerry Hutch, or are they going to the guard's going to kind of go back now to day one and begin to build their case and potentially bring in other evidence that we have not heard? Is it simply just going to be the evidence that we've heard in this trial? I don't know if they can just do that, because this case has come under so much scrutiny. So I don't foresee, like, I don't think, I might eat my own words, but I don't see Patsy Hutch being arrested next week and, this investigation suddenly ramping up. And I think they're going to take their time with it.
Oh, absolutely. Something has just come into my head. No idea, but these things happen. I wonder, would the cold case review team, or the serious crime review team, what we call the cold case team, I wonder would they be called in to have a look at it, bring fresh eyes? Because that's, after a certain amount of time that does happen, that could be possible.
Interesting, yeah.
Okay, so now, I'm not going to say these people are losers, but it's in the negative, because I don't want to disrespect them, because they've lost their son. I think it's been a bad experience. The whole thing has been a bad experience for the Byrne family. I mean, they lost their son. They've seen acquittals. So
yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
This was obviously hugely important to the Byrne family. They sat in the trial every single day, and they were extremely angry to the point of protest at what happened with Patrick Hutch Jr. I can recall that. I remember them screaming and shouting at the top of their lungs, "No justice for David Byrne." And they were very upset at that point in time. And I think their general feeling was that everybody and everything was against them, that the media were against them, that the state was against them, the guards were against them, and they were never going to get justice. To a certain extent, they did get justice in that Jonathan Doyle, Patrick Doyle, Paul Murphy, and Jason Bonney have all received convictions, have all been found guilty of involvement overall in what happened to their son.
But nobody has been convicted of the murder.
But nobody has been convicted of the murder. And, look, they have long blamed the Hutches in relation to that. And there is nobody with the surname Hutch convicted for this crime. And so I recall their reaction when Gerry Hutch was acquitted. They weren't long leaving the courtroom. They were very annoyed. They didn't want to speak. They were very, very upset with that particular decision. So I think in their mind, they felt that Gerry Hutch was guilty. And so they were very, very upset. So yes, yes, overall they're in a bad situation at the moment, and I'd say very, very distraught.
Well, that do us for today. It's been a good pod, but it's been a long pod.
It has, yes. Thanks very much for listening to us, and we'll continue to do pods in the future. They won't always be about Gerry Hutch, but we have many other things that we'd like to talk about. So we'll see how the week progresses, and thanks very much.
Yeah, and just before you go, Ciaran, our producer who knows everything about everything and tells us what to do, is talking about, widening the focus of it, doing a bit of international crime as well. So lads and lassies, whatever you think would be interested, if you want us to do pods about it, doesn't have to be in Ireland, it could be anything at all.
Send us your suggestions, yeah.
Send us your suggestions, and we will set up a wee list. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.